So put Israel in Austria, call it Israel, make the Danube be the boundary between the Austrian area. So instead of calling it the West Bank, you call it the North Bank, right? And put the Austrians there. Vienna will rename it Jerusalem. And then Tyrol, we'll call it the Tyrol Strip. And we'll just shove a bunch of the Austrian population into the North Bank and the Tyrol Strip. But then let's colonize the North Bank. So the dominant anti-Jewish ideology was originally called Judenhaus in Germany, which meant Jew hatred. The problem with the name was it sounds like an emotional thing as opposed to a logical thing. So they coined the phrase anti-Semitism so that they could say, look, it's not that I have an emotion, I disagree with the presence of Jews in Europe. A component of the anti-Semitic movement was we just wanted the Jews to leave. The initial ideology didn't want to kill the Jewish population. Obviously, it morphs into that and turns into the Holocaust. But the original goal wasn't to kill them; it was just to evict them. In the same way that there's a portion of the United States population that wants to evict undocumented immigrants, or that the German population wanted to evict undocumented Polish immigrants, or that the British wanted to evict the Polish immigrants, and that's why they voted for Brexit, right? It's that mentality. And so here are these profoundly racist anti-Semites. They coined the phrase anti-Semitism. The Zionist movement goes, maybe they're right. Maybe we should leave Europe. Maybe we can't make a good life for ourselves here. World War II happens. There's the Holocaust, which is a catastrophic event, and the world becomes open to the idea that, yeah, there needs to be a Jewish state. The irony is if you're going to create the Jewish state, let's do it. So I'm part Austrian. I want to out that because I'm going to suggest the Middle East peace solution. Let's make Austria a new Israel. Hitler was an Austrian. The Germans, Austria is German. They speak German. I'm not German, I'm Austrian, whatever. They're Germans. Germany did the Holocaust. Germany annexed Austria and did the Holocaust. So put Israel in Austria, call it Israel, make the Danube be the boundary between the Austrian area. So instead of calling it the West Bank, you call it the North Bank, right? And put the Austrians there. Vienna will rename it Jerusalem. And then Tyrol, we'll call it the Tyrol Strip. And we'll just shove a bunch of the Austrian population into the North Bank and the Tyrol Strip. But then let's colonize the North Bank and create little walled off sections and ghettoize I think that's the solution, the natural solution. Instead, the world thought, let's do this to Palestine, which is ironic because the Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form. In the aftermath of all of this, the UN votes to divide Palestine and create an Israel and a Palestine. The vote for the division gave Israel about 55% of Palestine and gave the Palestinians 45%. So the 55% that was going to go to Israel, that land was to create a Jewish-only state. And then the 45% that was going to go to Palestine would be for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But the problem was that the land didn't belong to the Jewish population, right? Because they bought 5 to 10% of the land. So basically you're gifting somewhere between 45 and 50% of the land to the Zionist movement. Well, what about the Palestinians already living there? So the Arabs rejected this. The Israelis invaded. They declare their independence. What it is it's a colonial enterprise. They invade and conquer Palestine. There's a war, the 1948 war, and the Egyptian army goes in with rifles that don't work. They had tanks that were profoundly flawed, like tanks that could only turn in one direction, or the turret didn't turn, or the machine gun didn't work. They were mostly, I don't know if they were mostly, but a lot of them were Stuarts, which were these little itty bitty tankettes. The Israelis were better armed, better equipped. They had more combat experience. There was a bunch of them. There was a huge invasion force. The Jordanians made an attempt to stop this. The Syrians fought. There were Iraqi units that showed up as volunteers. Nobody could stop the Israelis from creating the state. By the time they were done, the Israelis ended up with 78% of Palestine. So the UN division of Palestine created 3 Israeli wedges, one in the middle, one in the northeast, and then one in the south. And then it created 4 Palestinian wedges, one that was about twice the size of the Gaza Strip, where the Gaza Strip is like the remnant of it, one that was probably about 1 1/3 times the size of the West Bank, where the West Bank is, and then one in the northwest. So, like Bethlehem was supposed to be in the West Bank, and then Haifa was supposed to be Palestinian. And by the time the Israelis were done, they had shrunk the West Bank, they had dramatically shrunk the Gaza Strip, and they just took the remaining piece. There were 4 pieces because Jaffa was going to become a little enclave in Palestine that was completely surrounded by Israel and the sea. And then Jerusalem was going to be a neutral zone, and it was going to be administered by the United Nations. That was the plan. And the Israelis, of course, broke the whole thing. Old Jerusalem or East Jerusalem ended up in Jordan. West Jerusalem ended up in Israel. And the Israelis, during the conquest, committed some acts of terrorism. So there's a place called Deir Yassin where they conduct a massacre. And the hope was to cause panic in the Palestinian population, to cause them to run away. And they did. A huge portion of the Palestinian population flees, fearing that Deir Yassin was just the beginning of a series of massacres. One of the catastrophic ironies of all of this is Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial, is across the valley from Deir Yassin. So it's almost like there's the commemoration of a terrible, cruel injustice across the valley from a terrible, cruel injustice. Instead of the world creating more justice, it heaped more suffering on a population of people that had nothing to do with the initial suffering.